Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Linda. Thank you all for being here on this first Sunday of Unity Awakening 2019. So where to begin our study of 12 powers and 7 chakras and their relationship to psychology and religion? You know, the roots of New Thought, that is Unity, Centers for Spiritual Living, Universal Foundation for Better Living, International New Thought Alliance, all the branches of New Thought come from the same branches of psychology. And because the science of psychology and New Thought emerged in the last half of the 19th century, but the roots go much deeper than that. And in indigenous cultures around the world from time immemorial, it was always the role of the shaman to address what were the illnesses and the discords in people's lives. What's going on? Was there an evil spirit? Was there something in the individual that needed to be healed? So the role was both medicine man and counselor and priest all rolled in together. Well, over time and through study, humanity became aware that there was something more to us than meets the eye, and that was the development of the study of the unconscious. When I was in graduate school, one of the courses I had was just that, the history of the unconscious. In our textbook, I kid you not, was this thick, 800 pages. And one of the things that was highlighted in there is that through shamanism and then going fast forward to mesmerism and hypnosis, people became aware of the fact there's more to us than meets the eye. You know, there's our conscious mind, what we know that we know, what we know that we feel, but there's this whole storehouse within us that's either in the unconscious or we call it the subconscious, and there are ways to access that, the storehouse of memories and dreams and reflections. And by understanding how our subconscious and our unconscious minds connect, and even connect with something higher called the superconscious, that's a different talk for a different day, also known as divinity, then we might grow to understand the totality of our being and have a rich, full, and abundant life. Many times people discover themselves acting out in ways that they don't even understand why they're doing that. That's something emerging from the unconscious. Well, when Charles and Myrtle Fillmore co-founded the Unity movement, they realized that there was something about the power of the mind. They realized there was something about the unconscious that was connected to divinity, and they wanted to pull it all together to help people understand how their thoughts and their feelings created the world in which they lived. But it didn't come without some criticism. And a clicker that if I turn it on will work. I'm going to try it this time. You learn something new every week, and sometimes it's the same thing over and over again. All right, there. Charles Fillmore wrote, "Then the carping critic cries, 'Your religion is psychology instead of Christianity.' Our answer is that the new Christianity includes an understanding of psychology, but does not stop with an analysis of the mind. It goes on to the highest phase of mind's possibility, unity with spirit." This is commonplace in New Thought. Carl Jung echoed something very similar in his work when he said, "I strongly advocate, therefore, revision of our religious formulas with the aid of psychological insight. Only a thing that changes and evolves lives, but static things mean spiritual death. There's a reason why the Dead Sea is called the Dead Sea. Water flows into it and does not flow out. It's one way." So what he's saying is that our faith, our spirituality has to continue to grow and evolve and include more new elements. New Thought does that by recognizing that an ancient teaching coming out of Buddhism, that with our thoughts, we create our words. With our words, we create our minds, our worlds. So we want to understand that not only that happens, but we are connected with a power and presence greater than ourselves. You call it spirit, you call it God, call it whatever you want to. But when we understand the merger of these things, then we have the capacity to create a world that we want to live in. So different schools of psychology and different schools of theology have different theories or frameworks about understanding the psyche, understanding the spirit, understanding one's psychological and spiritual well-being. And so what New Thought and what analytical psychology of Carl Jung have is a desire to support individuals in having life, in having it abundantly. And that's what Jesus is reported to have said in John 10:10. So our emphasis in New Thought is present tense, rather than what happens when it comes next. You know, we sometimes jokingly say that mainstream religion's biggest concern is where you will spend eternity, smoking or non-smoking. It's just a joke, lighten up. And it's not to say that our approach is right and theirs is wrong. Both have a place. But where we put our emphasis is life right now. So people will sometimes ask, so what happens, what comes next? Our foundational belief is that the nature of God is altogether good, whether you have a body or don't have a body. So you don't have to worry about it. But let's do our best to live lives of love and joy and integrity right now. The rest will take care of itself. So when I was in graduate school, I studied religion psychology in depth through a graduate liberal studies program at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington, and kept finding that in analytical psychology, so much of what Carl Jung was teaching was what we teach in Unity as well. And yet, in my academic study, I could find no relation or no parallel that highlighted that Jung and Fillmore knew who each other was. So very interesting. Parallel tracks, synchronistic, one might say. But let's talk about 12 powers for a moment. Then we're going to talk about the 7 chakras, and we're somehow tied together and be out of here in time for the games that start at 1 o'clock. Just kidding. Well, seriously. So, The 12 Powers of Man is a book written by Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore, and it was published in 1930. However, he'd been working on this theory that there were 12 bodily centers of energy for many, many years. In fact, in the year 1920, each edition of Unity magazine, still published today, you can get a copy in our bookstore, focused each month on one of the 12 powers. So this is something he'd been working on for many, many years. And his goal in teaching 12 powers is what we refer to in Unity as regeneration, namely raising the physical body, in his words, to the incorruptible body as demonstrated by Jesus. And, so much so that basically you would raise your energetic vibration so high that you would beam out of here and go back to the Enterprise. Well, at least that's, when I first heard it, that's the only visual that worked for me. So let me just read to you a little bit in his own words about what this process of regeneration actually was. He said, those who feel that they are ready for the great adventure in the attainment of eternal life in the body here and now should not be deterred because there are no outstanding examples of men who have risen to this most exalted degree. Third slide. Through mental energy, or the dynamic power of mind, man can release the life of the electrons secreted in the atoms that compose the cells of the body. The method of release of this body energy and its controlled are mystically taught by Jesus. So Fillmore intuited a mystical teaching out of the ministry and the life of Jesus. Well, guess what? He himself did not demonstrate regeneration. However, all is not lost. What did become mainstream, whether through the work of Unity or other teachers, is what we know today as the mind-body connection. We sometimes know it as the placebo effect, that what your thoughts are can impact your experience of your body. Do you really believe? What do you believe about your body? Or as we sometimes talk about mind over matter. You know, if you don't mind, it don't matter. So, mind over matter. But there is a mind-body connection. How many of you have heard about that? How many of you have had an experience with that? Absolutely. So there is a parallel and an influence of thought to body. I've talked to a lot of people who have been healed in a variety of different ways, and that's the way they attribute it to. Myrtle Fillmore, co-founder of the Unity movement, experienced a healing through mind-body connection, and many of us have. So let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of this regeneration process. Fillmore taught that there were 12 gangliotic nerve centers that had specific functions within the development of the body and the soul. Each nerve center was identified with one of Jesus' apostles. And just as Jesus called the 12 to work with him in ministry, so the inner Christ calls the 12 to serve in manifesting the regenerated body. 12 different centers. And in the class, we'll look at more detail about which centers, what the centers are, and the apostle who represents them. But many years later, in 2002, Reverend Letty Hammock from Unity of Clearwater, who co-wrote the song we sang to lead into meditation, put forth another theory, a broader theory, and a more complete theory. that she called the 12 women of the chalice. So through her discernment work, she intuited that there were 12 scriptural women, 12 women in the scriptures, who represented these same powers. So that when we look at the development of the 12 powers of humanity, we can integrate both their feminine and masculine elements. And all of us have these same types of energies in us. So in order to grow and mature appropriately, we need to integrate the fullness of our being that includes masculine and feminine elements. Again, we'll get into more detail about this in the class. So what do we do about unity and yoga, Kundalini yoga? I'm making peace with this clicker. Carl Jung said in 1936, "In the course of the centuries, the West will produce its own yoga, and its basis will be laid down by Christianity." What he didn't know was that 6 years earlier, Charles Fillmore had published The 12 Powers of Man, which to me was a parallel, which is the beginning of a yoga based in Christianity. So that led me to want to compare the chakras to the 12 powers. And so let's talk a little bit about the root chakra. So I just want to tell you that as soon as we begin talking about chakras, I know people have studied the material for at length and said, oh, there's more than 7, there's 9, there's 12, there's 15, there are hundreds, they're subtle, they're not subtle. So we need to explore all of them. And say, no, we don't. 7. We're 7. We're just doing 7. We're going to keep it simple. And hopefully you will feel inspired to study more. But for the basis of what we're doing here, 7. Lucky number 7. And the root chakra is the first. And, well, wait a minute. Let's back up. Let's talk about this term Kundalini. Kundalini is a word in Hindu that means coiled. So the teaching is that at the base of the spine, there is a coil of energy. And as through the various practices of Kundalini yoga, this energy, much like in our meditation today, rises through each one of the chakras, bringing healing and transformation and allowing the energy of that experience of that chakra to be released. Medical intuitive Carolyn Mace put it this way, that as this energy activates each of the chakras, the universal life lessons represented are made evident, and the individual experiences spiritual maturity and power. Now that is a very broad statement distilling thousands of years of teaching. But that's the bottom line. We're activating energy in the various centers of our body so we might be whole and complete. And when all this happens, we call that a Kundalini awakening experience, kind of akin to enlightenment, kind of akin to realization of Christ consciousness. So we see parallels in different traditions around the world using different words for a very similar tradition. There are parallels in other traditions as well. In the Hopi tradition, there are 5 etheric energy centers. The Tibetan tradition teaches one course of understanding the psychological framework of energy centers. Even in mystical Judaism, it shows up as well. And I believe that all of these are archetypes, symbols of foundational energy that is found in all of us. Again, more details in the class. The root chakra represents safety, security, survival issues. It is a foundation. It represents our connectedness to the earth. And the color that represents the root chakra is red, because if your basic foundational needs, food, clothing, shelter, are not being met, we go into red alert mode. Red is a dense color. It grabs everyone's attention wherever you see it. And so it causes us to make sure that our foundational issues and matters are addressed. It also the root chakra relates to our families of origin, our culture of origin. It relates us to the earth. So if we have a secure foundation, then we might be like a tree, that even though the winds might come and storms might come, the tree is very well rooted and can survive and prosper in the world. If a tree is not rooted, it's going to fall over and we're going to have problems. So when our needs are being met appropriately related to our root chakra, our energies are flowing. Now, if you're a human being, you might have experienced some level of dysfunction in your family, in your culture, in your world. We all get some level or another. So it becomes important for us to realize when we're feeling etheric and floating and to do the things that we need to do so that we are grounded. prayer practices, meditation practice, yoga practice helps us stay connected and let us know that what we need in order to have a healthy ego, a strong sense of self, and to individuate. Individuation is a term we need to address when we're talking about the root chakra. Individuation, I'm going to make peace with this somehow. Slide number 5. Individuation refers to the process through which a person achieves a sense of individuality separate from the identity of others and begins to consciously exist as a human being in the world. We might want to call it simply growing up. It's true. But growing up as a mature individual person, you know, I am who I am. I get that I have strengths and weaknesses. I understand myself. Individuation might be called the process by which we fulfill our potential to become all that we can be. It's the process of integrating the conscious and the unconscious. It is a way of understanding our true self, our inner self. It is another way of saying I am awakened to the truth of my being as an individualized expression of Christ consciousness. So how do we relate this to the faculty of elimination and release? So we have 12 faculties and 12 powers. So I just simply laid them all out as a chart like on the cover of the book. And notice that where the root chakra is our faculty of release and elimination. So think about this song we sang to meditation about cleansing and releasing whatever needs to be let go. So here's the practice. So if we are to truly become an individual person, to know our strength, to know ourselves, separate and distinct from our culture, from our family, from our various dysfunctions of the world, then we have to be able to go within and look at ourselves and ask the question, what do I really believe? What do I really think that might be separate and distinct from my family of origin, my culture of origin, or my world? Who am I really? Because if we are to grow and mature and to become the best that we can be, we have to be able to say, is this really who I am? Is who I say I am really who I am? I'll give you a classic example. When I was in 4th grade, there was an election for county sheriff. And I remember sitting around the classroom, lunchroom rather, and we were all talking about who we supported for sheriff. I don't really know if a lot of 4th graders are really that invested in the election for county sheriff. But what I remember is, in looking back at that experience, we were simply parroting what our parents said. There you go. And how long do we grow up in our lives just simply parroting what people around us have said? Family, churches, schools, communities, whatever. Without ever taking a moment to take stock. Do I really believe this? You know, so many people come to a setting like this, a New Thought community, Unity, and because on their faith journey, they've come to a point of starting to question what they may have learned elsewhere and just started thinking, I don't think this fits for me anymore. So if I am to individuate, if I am to really know myself as a spiritual being, as a human being, I've got to be able to say, this is me, this is what I believe, this is what I stand for, this is what I'm about. That doesn't necessarily mean discounting the family of origin or the community of origin or wherever, but it might mean putting that in a new context, reframing it from a sense of, I've done my work. I've come to a point of realizing who I am, and I've come to realize that in the process of becoming who I am, I have to chip away who I am not. What sort of accretions? You know, I was just at the dentist lately. You know, they scrape the tartar. Sometimes we have to scrape the tartar off of our lives and say, don't believe that. This is what I believe, and I'm willing to stand up and to be strong in that. That's the connection. And we'll go into more detail in the class on Tuesday night and Thursday morning about what it means to integrate these two archetypal ideas of life and release. So when we are, question, I just want to close with some questions. Quite often we come to a New Thought Center or a Unity Church and ask ourselves that, and we affirm, we're on a spiritual path, we're evolving, we're growing. What does that really mean? I mean, we use these terms glibly, and I think there's almost a sense that we intuitively understand, but I don't know. But shamans and faith healers and scientists and people around the world for millennia have been engaged in the process of making meaning of our lives. And when we can make a meaning of our lives, when we understand we have the capacity to make the meaning, then we find our purpose. And if we know what our purpose is and what we're about, we are more likely to experience peace of mind. We are more likely to utilize our life energy and service in such a way that we do create a world that works for everyone. And we make a difference. Carl Jung said that among all my patients in the second half of life, that is to say over 35, there has not been one whose problem in the last resort was not that of finding a religious outlook in life. It is safe to say that every one of them fell ill, had distress of some sort, because he had lost what living religions of every age have given to their followers, and not one of them has been really healed who did not regain his religious outlook. Of course, this has nothing whatever to do with a particular creed or membership in a church. And when he's talking about this religious outlook, what he's talking about is the meaning-making capacity. What he's talking about is engaging with the sacred. What he's talking about is finding value and a purpose in a higher calling. What he's talking about is connecting with the most archetypal and fundamental truths of our being, which answers the question, why am I here? What am I here to do? And how can I love? So in other words, the collective problem, if I can use such a term, for those of us over 35, and even those of us under 35, is to really maintain or discover this numinous or sacred outlook on life. So in other words, to develop the capacity to make meaning, find purpose, and discern value in living. So it is my affirmation that through our romp of 12 powers and 7 chakras, again, only 7, that we will further ourselves along this quest. So I hope to see you again soon, Tuesday night, Thursday morning, or next Sunday. Peace be with you, and namaste.